little bit more complicated and harder than at first when I say that I want to securely compute and. Like, it might intuitively sound easy, but oftentimes what we care is about making the outcome in some sense undistinguishable from of who input what. So if we permutated the above cards enough times, then even though they're next to each other, we wouldn't know which one's the middle card. I'm sorry. Sorry, just kind of fell into the rabbit hole thought. Right, it's a little bit more complicated than we wished, or than it seems. And it works, but with one assumption, that is, when both parties decide to randomly shuffle both cards an arbitrary amount of times, that they don't actually like peek under what's the actual cards saying before they actually shuffle it, right? And that last question, which we kind of talked about earlier, is what if a party always says yes, just to try to figure out if the other party said no or not? We can't really avoid that, right? And as we kind of emphasized earlier, that is actually okay. And we'll see why next. Let's take a quick second to kind of talk about a different concept, which are functionalities. A few examples of functionalities would be computing and, would be key exchanging, and voting. So ultimately, it's a goal that parties want to achieve. And there are different words that we say we design things to solve these. Some people say that they're algorithms, some people say they're protocols, but essentially we want to solve the problem that we're facing. And so in order to do so in the cryptography sense, we want to first of all mathematically specify what our inputs, outputs, and goal of the ultimate protocol or functionality has. And right, so if we can reconsider the idea of and again, our inputs would be each party's input, 0 or 1, and our outputs would be the result of that secure and computation. And because of that, we kind of, that's our specified functionality, and the result is there for each party. So you can unavoidably figure out what a party's input was if you input yes. So that's like a design of the functionality, not your protocol having a problem, is what I want to stress here. So yeah, next let's talk about semi-honest security. We kind of talked about this earlier in the sense of that it is a threat model that we assume both parties play nicely and follow the rules of how a protocol should work. In order to do so, we start with having an ideal world and a real world, where in the ideal world, everything is ideal in the sense of all we're caring about is how that functionality would work. We don't care about how we're going to actually realistically solve this problem. So one of the easiest ways to think of this is that you have a uncorruptible middle party that will help you deal with all the math and securely handle outputs to all parties. Now, obviously, that's, well, as ideal states, not very realistic. Would you trust a person who claims that they're uncorruptible with your credit card number to hand to another, to charge for another company that's working with you? Probably not. So that's why we need real world solutions to actually work around and achieve this ideal world's view. Cool. So next, this is the definition of semi-honest security. Read up, and I believe after this, it'll be obvious and easy to you guys. Just kidding, no. So in semi-honest security, as we just stated, there's an ideal world. This is where everything is perfect. We don't have to worry about security and how do we actually achieve these stuff. And on the other side, I'm sorry. On the other side, there is a real world where we actually want to decide or design our protocols, and we actually want to make these things work. And what semi-honest security is saying, are we able to use what we see in our ideal world to reconstruct what we see in the real world? Because if we are, then that's really good. Because basically what this is saying is you're not figuring out new information in the real world that you can't simulate or use what you see in the ideal world to compute. So I will give an example in the next few slides, but does this more or less make sense to anyone for the intuitive? Cool. So what is a view? As we list above, there is the party itself's input, the party's output, so what they will compute and then eventually come out with. And there are things that the party receives throughout the protocol, if this is in the real world. In an ideal world, obviously, that wouldn't be a problem. So essentially, it's what the party sees, right? And let's come up with an example of securely computing XOR. So this is a protocol where each party's A, B, C, D have inputs, lowercase a, B, C, D. And how we'll do this is we'll securely, the first party, which we'll say A, will randomly come up with a random number, a random bit, a one-time pad, essentially. And it will XOR its input with that random seed R and send it to B. So if you take a moment to think about this right now, we can kind of figure that all BCs is A XORed with something. There's no way to actually figure out what A has. And basically this is just a chain. B will XOR its result with its own input and send it to C. And then C will tack on its input and then send it back to A. Where if we learned a little bit about XORing from computer science, then what A can do is it can essentially XOR itself the result with R again and receive the output A XOR B XOR C, and announce it to all parties so they can share the same output. Does this intuitively or at first sight kind of make sense to everyone why this is not problematic? Does anyone have a problem? Question? Yes.
Are we saying that A behaves nicely?
Yes. Remember, this is a semi-honest security model where all parties play nice. Yes. So is this secure? Well, not all of us. I mean, you guys are. We're mathematicians and computer science, so we like to prove things. Let's kind of try to prove that this is secure by using the definition that we kind of mentioned earlier, how we want to use the ideal world to simulate the real world to prove that we're not learning extra information that we can't simulate in the real world. So for party A, which is the only party that's actually doing extra steps, what will it see? Well, in the ideal world, this functionality would work really nice because you'd just have to pass your input to an incorruptible party, and then all parties could do the same, and then they'd receive the output. So in the ideal world, all you'd be seeing is your own input and the result. However, in the real world, it's not that nice. So we had to do the protocol that we just specified. If we recall what A has been doing, it's been sampling a random bit. It's been XORing its input to that random bit, and it's been receiving R XOR A, XOR B, XOR C. So for its real world view, actually all it's doing is the only extra information that it has is a random bit that it generated. So what we can do in order to prove that this is secure is also sample a random bit and XOR this. Yeah, that's actually all there is to it. Does that make sense, or does anyone kind of feel iffy about this or need further clarification? Cool. Oh, yes.
Are you saying this is secure?
Yes, I am claiming that this is secure.
What about like from perspective?
Right, that's what we're going to look at next. Yes. So for the party A, at least, we just stated and we just proved that they're not learning extra information because the only extra information they have is a random bit. So for any other party, what we'll be receiving is a random bit XORed with whatever sequence has been XORed up to now, their own input and the result. That is the real world view. Of course, again, in the ideal world view, you'll have your own input and you'll have the result. So how can we simulate this? Again, we have your input, and then you receive something that's a random bit XORed with everything. And then ultimately you also receive your result output, which is A XOR B XOR C. This is where it gets just slightly mathy, but I'm going to insert something that is that any random number or any random string XORed with a unrandom input or an unrandom string is still random. And if you think of this, this is due to how random strings bits will have a 50% of being 0 and 50% of being 1. And no matter what your input is, if you try to calculate the outputs of XORing it with a 0 or XORing it with a 1, your probability of outcoming as a 0 or a 1 is still 50% each, which means that it is still random. So because of that, basically, we're saying that this is secure, and hence the protocol that we just specified a bit earlier is secure. Any questions so far? Does that make sense? Yes. I'm sorry, could you say that again? Yes. Right. 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 So what you're saying is if another party has B's input in the real world. Right, that would be a problem because B's input isn't random, right? B's input is something that is, well, what B decided on pretty much. So yeah, in that sense, it would be insecure. And that's a nice thing, right? If we're actually able to figure that out, that there's such a protocol that results in that, then we actually know that this is an insecure protocol because of what you just mentioned. Because the party that has B's input is learning extra information that it shouldn't be able to learn from the ideal world. Cool. If you don't have any questions, then we will keep on for now. Yeah, so I will talk. That was semi-security. There is malicious security, which I will. It's a little bit more complicated in the sense of how. In malicious security, as Nathan just stated, we have to take account into parties not playing nicely. So, for example, giving back to our securely computing and example, a party could always input 1 just in order to figure out what the other party is inputting instead of, and then, compute their own result actually on their own. And so the way that malicious security works from a very high level is we actually take that into account. So when we're constructing our ideal world, what we do is we say for each step that an adversary has a few choices that it can make, including following the protocol nicely, including sending in malicious input, or including aborting, which means that they decide that they've learned enough about what they want to learn and they stop participating in the protocol and run away because, I don't know, they're online and they can do so. And it's the proofs get like really long and tedious in the sense of you have to take consideration of such things and construct programs that can cope with that. And this is where I bring up that this is a subject that has a lot of depth in it. That was a very high level surface of what the main idea of it is. For more, if you'd like to learn and find these subjects interesting, Professor David Heath, who is with us today here, and taught my secure computation class this semester, is also holding it as CS 598DH next semester. Go ahead and enroll if you guys are like it. And yeah, again, unfortunately, we have limited time and I can't cover everything. I hope at least that gave you a rough idea of what secure computation is about. I would also like to thank SIGPwny, given that this is my last semester here, and you guys have been awesome, very supportive and environment, and made it fun for me. Thanks so much. All right, last words. I'm sorry, last words. So if you guys, however, decide that because of your coursework being too busy or you don't have enough credit space to put stuff in, here are a few keywords that are relevant to secure computation, including, and these slides will be posted later on as well, so you can also look at it then. But naming a few: oblivious transfer, zero knowledge proof, malicious security. There's also this cool concept called covert security, which means that unlike semi-honest security, we assume that parties could cheat, but we are willing to risk a certain percentage of them cheating in return of being to catch them cheating and telling the world that they're bad people. So yeah, there are a lot of interesting topics in here. Why do we want to do MPC? Well, we have more computing power nowadays. So like things that kind of seemed unfeasible in the sense of cryptography being time expensive and space expensive is becoming less of a problem. It can also, help when we want to, for example, I'm sorry, like catch I'm sorry. Oh God, I need water. Like for example, catching money laundering. If two banks want to work together, but they also have like legal reasons that they can't reveal client information, how do they track some person who's been like transferring money between many banks in order to event the laws without breaking the laws of leaking information to other banks? Or another example, whether we like it or not, cryptocurrency actually is also another thing that benefits off of MPC. And Amazon Web Services is also another thing that's big nowadays. Essentially what we're doing is we're making a server that, do we trust it or not? Maybe, maybe not. But it's doing computation for us. So how do we make it possible that they can't figure out what we're doing while still being able to benefit off their services? So these are some motivations and why we want MPC. Some current challenges include like making it more efficient and stuff like that. All right, at last, I'd like to give an example of what protocols that are secure against malicious security could allow. If we recall, our secure definition of malicious security actually allows an adversary to kind of do arbitrary movements throughout the protocol, not because we like that, but because in the real world, unfortunately, that is something that an arbitrary could do. So, for example, SIGPwny trusts me today to give a presentation in front of everyone, and they're still preventing me from learning all their information of what their server passwords are or whatever, I don't know, but I can still do this and it's still secure. Oh. Thank you.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you, Michael. It's the last week of the semester. We've done a lot of cool things this semester. Glad to have you all as part of it. I'd like to give a huge shout out to the admins and helpers. If you could all stand up, please. Yeah. And thanks to everybody who also presented. I'd also like to give a special announcement to people that are graduating, especially among helpers and admins here. So Thomas, it's his last semester here. Good up for Thomas. We also know Michael today, his last semester as well. Michael. And also quite possibly something, I'm not sure. But
I believe he is.
big question mark. Yeah. It is. Yeah. It is. It's graduating. Okay. It is graduating?
Yes.
It took about-
Yesterday he said he was, today he told me that.
Oh, God.
I just want to let y'all know this is my last semester as sole president, so I'm going to be handing off entirely to the next semester. And I'm expecting it's going to be great. Next semester, I hope y'all come back. We'll be doing pretty cool stuff also year round, but it's been amazing. Thank you all.